So I've been using the Deluge for just over a year now. Would I buy it again? Well, before I answer that, let me just briefly go over what the Deluge is and how I use it in my workflow for people who don't know what it is or might be thinking about buying one. I was first enamored with the Deluge when I saw it in action on one of my friend's reels on Insta, and he was using it to construct a song for January, and I was instantly captivated by the blinky lights. What can I say? I'm a sucker for blinky lights. I immediately went down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out what this crazy box was and what it could do. The Deluge is made by a company called Synthstrom Deluge out of New Zealand, and it's marketed as kind of a boutique all-in-one groove box, and it is certainly that. Now, I've used other groove boxes in the past, and while they're certainly fun to goof around on, I've never found them to be particularly useful for songwriting or any kind of traditional production. Typically what you get is you get a couple drum kits, you get a couple synth presets, and a limited amount of steps in the sequencer, and that's about it. It's cool for writing, quick little loops or playing around, but not much else. The Deluge is a whole different animal. The Deluge is a drum machine, a synth engine, a sampler, a multi-sampler, looper, arranger. You can even record directly into the thing with your traditional instruments or use the internal mic to make your own samples or loops. And it's battery powered and portable, so it's in this tiny little box, right? I mean, look at it. All of that in this tiny little box. When you first turn it on, you open into Song View, which is kind of like your home screen, and each vertical row represents an individual track. And each track can be a synth track, a kit track, an audio track, for like samples or loops that you can record into, or a MIDI or CV track that you can use to control other outboard gear. There's technically no limit to how many tracks you can have in your song, though you are limited by CPU, and while I do wish there was a bit more power in the CPU there, I've definitely run up against it plenty of times where I've had sample clipping and voices dropping, but I'd say for overall, most purposes, it's not really an issue. When you click into a track, you're immediately brought into the individual track for that particular instrument, and there you can assign it either as a synth or a kit, and you can select and create your sounds. Here, the LED grid acts like a traditional piano roll, which will be instantly familiar to anyone who's used a DAW in the last 30 years. Each vertical row represents a note or a sample, and each horizontal row represents a measure of time, so 16th notes, quarter notes, half notes, etc. You can even zoom in to get higher fidelity. Any lit up LED represents a note or sample at that given point in time. It's super intuitive and pretty much idiot proof. Pretty much. If writing in the piano roll isn't your cup of tea, you can also use the audition pads or the isometric keyboard and just hit record and record directly to the grid. This is kind of how I like to work. It just gives you a little more human feel, and the isometric keyboard is a godsend for anyone who comes from guitar background as opposed to a piano. It's laid out exactly the same way as notes are on a fretboard. On top of that, you can set the scale to a certain key so any illuminated lights are in key and you don't have to worry about hitting any sour notes. Now, the pads aren't velocity sensitive, and while I wish they were, and I kind of want to say that that's an oversight, there are a ton of pads on this thing, and making them all velocity sensitive probably would have made it cost prohibitive. You can, however, set velocity on a per set basis after the fact, or use an external MIDI controller if you don't want to deal with all that. After you've programmed in some melodies or loops, you can hop back into Song View and use the audition pads to launch and mute tracks to craft a performance. They'll always launch and mute in time, unless you choose not to do so by holding shift, so you'll feel like a pro in no time. It's just so tactile and intuitive, having real life pads to press and real life knobs to turn, that it makes it really fun to quickly sketch out a song. There's just something about the immediacy of it all that allows for experimentation and making mistakes and trying something different really quickly. You can do all of that in a traditional DAW, of course, but it just feels more cumbersome and takes so much longer. That's just a quick overview, of course. There's plenty of videos out there if you want to dig deeper into the nuts and bolts of the Deluge, if you really want to dig into it. So why did I buy one? Well, first of all, like I said, I'm a sucker for blinky lights. But also, the more I dug into it, the more this looked like an instrument that was made from my dreams. A fun groove box that I could actually write songs on. Still, I figured at best I was getting a portable sketch pad that I could take anywhere with me to jam out and quickly sketch out an idea that could later develop into a more thought out song in my DAW. What I didn't expect to get was a synth that I actually like, A synth a lot of people complain about. I actually made another video about that. If you want to check it out, I'll post a link in the corner. But a synth that I think is not only more than capable, but really good at making a really amazing sound design choices. I didn't expect to love the sequencer so much that the Deluge would become the core and the brains of my setup, controlling all my other gear. Luckily, with a host of MIDI, CV, and gate outputs and inputs, it's more than possible to do that. I didn't expect constant firmware updates, first from Synthstrom, and now from the community itself as it's gone open source, that continue to expand and improve everything that the Deluge can already do. More than anything, I didn't expect to love the Arranger so much that I would largely abandon working in my DAW. The Arranger works the same way as a timeline does in a traditional DAW. It's, all your tracks are in a row vertically, and you can block them out horizontally in time and compose a song from all your various tracks and clips. It's not that it's so radically different from working the same way in a DAW. As much as it is, it's just like the rest of the Deluge. It's tactile, it's intuitive, and it encourages experimentation. I guess I just never expected the Deluge to become my most indispensable piece of gear. It's my muse, it's my constant source of inspiration. Since I bought the Deluge, I've written and released nearly a track a week over the course of the last year, and that in and of itself feels like quite a lot to me. But the craziest thing about that is that nearly every one of those songs was written, composed, and in many cases finished on the Deluge. I never expected or planned to go almost entirely DAW-less, but here we are. So, after a year of using the Deluge, would I buy it again? Absolutely. That's not to say it's not without its flaws. I wish the CPU was more powerful. I wish it had velocity-sensitive keypads. I wish its effects were a little better. But all in all, it's a fantastic piece of kit that only keeps getting better with constant firmware updates. I can't recommend it enough. If you'd like to hear a couple examples of what the Deluge can do, check out my Song Sketch series playlist, and if you found this video helpful, consider hitting that like or that subscribe. We post tons of Deluge content focused mostly around the creative process, as well as all the songs we create in that process. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Cheers.